Right now, a battle between Rudy Giuliani and one of his ex-wives has cast a spotlight on an issue affecting a growing number of Canadians. The former New York City mayor's efforts late last year to cut spousal support to his ex-wife, Judith, because his income shrunk, has sparked some interest among older divorcees facing similar battles. Celebrities, athletes, well-paid professionals who end long-standing marriages often face obligations to pay significant sums to their former spouses. Spousal support, which is different from child support, is most likely to be paid when there's a large discrepancy between the spouse's incomes after they separate and if one spouse is the primary caregiver of young children. And as incomes change, pressure can mount to alter those agreements. Joining us to talk about how easy or difficult that is to do is Laura Paris, an associate lawyer at Shulman Family Law. Hi, Laura. Thanks a lot for doing this.
Hi, Barb. Thanks for having me.
How easy or difficult is it to change the spousal support agreement?
So I would say it's a relatively more difficult issue to deal with in the context of the family court, and the main reason for that is the threshold in terms of determining whether or not a change will be made is that you have to establish a material change in circumstances. Now, this material change concept, the definition is pretty loose, and that's why I say this is kind of a more difficult thing to deal with, because there's no necessarily cut and dry rules like as soon as this happens, that means you're entitled to an adjustment to spousal support. The issues are considered on a whole, so there may be a triggering factor such as a decrease in income, like in Mr. Giuliani's situation, but just by virtue of that decrease in income doesn't necessarily mean that you are going to get a termination of support, and also doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be a reduction of support, because again, it depends on the circumstances.
Okay, so when we say it depends on the circumstances, would one of those circumstances be the age of the person who's paying the support?
For sure. So something like retirement, for example, where someone's income typically drops when they reach the age of retirement, and typically, pension income is less than what you were earning, when you were working full time in your career. So something like that is going to or may trigger a reduction in spousal support, but doesn't necessarily mean a termination. So that's when you're looking at the other factors during the relationship, and that's when you're looking at, the length of the relationship. What were the different roles that were taken by each party during the relationship? If, for example, the person who is paying, the person who is receiving support had sacrificed their career during the relationship, maybe didn't pursue an education, or halted their career at a certain point to fulfill duties within the family unit, such as child rearing responsibilities, or taking care of the home, or otherwise. In circumstances like that, if they're getting separated, later in life when they're in their late 40s or 50s, the reality of them being able to maintain self-sufficiency, moving forward for the rest of their lives is not as likely as, someone who's younger, or someone who did not, siphon their career opportunities. So in those circumstances, while a decrease in income could certainly result in a decrease in the amount of spousal support that they're receiving, it doesn't mean that you're going to be able to get a termination just because, or just by virtue of the fact that you are now retiring and earning less of an income.
Do spousal support agreements ever include any kind of mention or agreement for the person who is paying When they get to a certain age, it will go down because the person expects to retire at that age? Or?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. So what we do include in agreements often where we see that there may be something foreseeable in the future that is going to result in a reduction in support, or going to result in a need to review the support, you'll actually include a review provision. So you'll have a certain amount of spousal support being paid for a certain duration of time, and then come, a certain year, that's when the provisions are going to be reviewed. And these review clauses could be as detailed or less detailed as you choose. You can simply say that it's going to be reviewed, and, you'll figure out the facts at that time, or you could set the parameters of the review, that the review is going to be based on, if there's a certain fluctuation in, a certain value of fluctuation in someone's income, that's going to trigger a review. So you can really arrange these clauses in any sort of way that you want, but the law provides in and of itself, without providing for it specifically in an agreement. The law provides for this ability to make these changes, again, under this term of a material change. So you don't necessarily have to include it in an agreement.
Okay, and I don't think anybody's ever happy about paying spousal support. I've heard from a lot of people, but let me ask you this. Is this kind of a word of caution to, because sometimes people are okay having their spouse, usually the wife, stay home with the kids for 20, 25 years, but then they're enraged when they have to pay spousal support. Is this sort of a word of caution to people? You know, if you're going to set up your family that way, this is what you could be faced with if the marriage doesn't work out.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I have many clients that I see, whether through a consultation at Shulman or, you know, clients that have retained us that have the conversation with me and say, you know, so you're telling me I worked hard my whole life just to keep paying?
Right.
You know, I worked hard to make money for my family. I worked hard, you know, to put food on the table and give my family the life that they deserve. And now because I worked so hard, I have to keep working harder for the rest of my life to support, you know, my ex-spouse who usually there's bitterness involved. So you don't want to keep supporting them. So that's, I mean.
How do you answer that?
The answer is, yeah, sorry. Unfortunately, that's the way that our law is. And I mean, unfortunately for the payor, it makes sense for the person who's receiving it because it is a reality that if you sat, you know, at a certain point in your life, it's difficult to make money that you were able to make, you know, if you started straight out of college or straight out of university, right? Okay,
so let me ask you this. For that person who's angry, if when their kids got to school age, they had agreed with their spouse, okay, now we're both going to be working again. Would that mean at the time when they split up 20 years later that they would have to pay much less spousal support, if any?
So there's different factors that are considered when you're determining a claim for spousal support. The two main things are needs-based claims and compensatory-based claims. So something that's compensatory is to essentially repay someone for the sacrifices they made in the relationship. The needs-based claim is actually it's a lifestyle-based claim where you're looking more at income discrepancies. So you don't necessarily have to have that element where you've sacrificed your career in order to make that claim for spousal support. Now, when those individuals, you know, typically women who are coming in and saying that I did sacrifice my career, they typically end up getting maybe a higher amount of support, but not necessarily. Really, where you'll see the benefit to them is actually in the duration of support. So the length of time they're receiving support for, opposed to someone who's simply only entitled to support due to, you know, a difference in lifestyle, due to the fact that by leaving their relationship, they're not going to be able to maintain the same lifestyle that they were when they had, you know, this dual income family.
And if you've got a husband and wife, for argument's sake, and the wife makes a lot more than the husband, is he going to be entitled to spousal support?
Absolutely. The law on spousal support is not gender specific. While it's, you know, to an extent seems to be, because, you know, the way society is and certain trends in relationships, the law is equal to either gender. So if you are a male and you have sacrificed your career to allow your wife to, you know, go to work and make money, and you took care of the kids, you are going to have the same argument that a woman would in your position.
Laura Paris, thanks a lot for doing this. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Associate lawyer at Shulman Family Law. Let's talk about this. Do you have any experience with this? I know people get really angry, and I get it. I asked her those specific questions, especially at the end, because people are given spousal support not based on the fact that you're a woman and you get spousal support. It's based on, as she said, have you stayed home, sacrificed your career, raised the family, and who makes more in the relationship? And it's amazing to me how the same people who claim there is no gender gap and men don't make more than women for whatever reason, and I know it's not always apples to apples, they are the same ones who complain that men always have to pay spousal support. Well, it's the higher income earner who often has to pay spousal support. 416-872-1010. Text us at 71010. Let us talk about this. Have you ever been involved in anything like this? Does the dynamic in a relationship change when the income changes? Like maybe you're paying spousal support and your income changed and you got it lowered, or you're receiving and somebody tried to make a change to it. 416-872-1010. Oh my God, I'm way late for traffic. It's 9:18. NewsTalk 1010 Time Saver Traffic. Talk 1010 Time Saver Traffic. Talk